I walked into my sister's wedding alone, and the laughter hit me before the doors even closed. Not whispers, full-on laughter. My father's voice cut through the room, loud and cruel, saying I couldn't even find a date. I felt hands shove my shoulder. The marble floor vanished. Cold water swallowed me as I fell into the fountain. For a second, no one helped. They clapped. Grown adults applauded while I stood dripping, humiliated. I looked at my father, smiled through the water, and said one sentence I had practiced for years. Remember this moment, because what they didn't know was who walked in next. On the outside, my family has always looked flawless. The kind of family people point at and say they must have it all figured out. Big house, polished smiles, perfect holiday photos framed and updated every year. Inside that house, I learned early how to stay quiet. My younger sister grew up in the spotlight. Teachers adored her. Relatives bragged about her. My parents spoke her name like it was a prize they'd won. I was the other one, the responsible one, the one who didn't cause problems and didn't get noticed either. At family dinners, conversations floated around me like I wasn't sitting at the table. If I did speak, my mother would smile tightly and say, "That's nice, sweetheart," before steering the topic back to my sister. My father preferred silence from me. Silence was obedience. Silence meant I wasn't embarrassing anyone. Birthdays were quick affairs, a cake from a grocery store, no candles some years. When I turned 16, my father forgot entirely. He remembered my sister's piano recital that night, though. I stood in the kitchen holding a plate, listening to applause echo from the living room. As I got older, I learned how to survive by being useful. I worked hard. I stayed disciplined. I built a career that demanded precision and calm, where mistakes mattered and emotions didn't get you far. Outside my family, that discipline earned respect. Inside it, nothing changed. By my early 30s, I'd stopped explaining myself to them. I stopped sharing achievements. I stopped correcting assumptions. It was easier to let them believe I was distant, difficult, too focused on work to build a normal life. That's why I showed up to the wedding alone. Not because I didn't have someone. Because I did. I just knew my family would never treat that part of my life with care. They would dissect it, compare it, measure it against my sister, and find it lacking somehow. So I kept it private, sacred, untouched by their opinions. When the invitation arrived, thick paper and gold lettering, I hesitated. I hadn't seen most of my relatives in over a year. I already knew how this would go. The looks, the questions, the quiet judgments. Still, I went, because some part of me needed to see if anything had changed, and another part of me needed proof that it hadn't. The venue was impossible to miss. Glass white flowers, soft music, drifting out into the afternoon air. Everything about it screamed celebration. I stepped inside and felt instantly out of place, like I'd walked into someone else's life by mistake. The first thing I noticed was the seating chart. My sister's name sat dead center, surrounded by our parents' close relatives and the people who mattered. My name was printed in smaller font pushed to the edge, a table near the back, not technically excluded, just relocated. I told myself not to care. I folded the escort card once, then again, sliding it into my clutch like it couldn't hurt me if I couldn't see it. As I walked toward my table, heads turned. Conversations dipped. I caught fragments as I passed. She came alone. I thought she was seeing someone. Still single, I guess. Someone smiled at me with the kind of pity that feels worse than cruelty. I smiled back because I'd learned that smiling kept things from escalating. At my table, distant relatives and acquaintances avoided eye contact, polite but curious. They asked safe questions. Work, traffic, weather. No one asked how I was. No one ever did. Across the room, my family laughed loudly. My father stood tall, glass in hand, soaking in attention. My mother leaned in close to my sister, adjusting something on her dress, her face glowing with pride. My sister caught my eye for a second. Her smile flickered. Then she looked away. I tried to focus on my breathing. The ceremony ended. Applause filled the room. Music shifted. People stood, moved, mingled. I stayed where I was, nursing a glass of water, watching dynamics I'd memorized years ago play out exactly the same. That's when my father started drinking faster. I noticed it because I always notice things like that. The slight change in his posture, the way his laughter grew sharper. his eyes drifting back to me again and again, like I was a loose thread he couldn't stop pulling at. A relative leaned down to whisper something to him. I couldn't hear it, but I saw his jaw tighten. His gaze locked on me. I felt it then, that familiar pressure in my chest, the warning signal. When my father stood up, the room responded automatically. Conversations quieted. Glasses paused mid-air. He had that effect on people. He always had. He cleared his throat and smiled the practiced kind that looked good from a distance. Families are about showing up for each other, he said loudly, about pride, about not letting personal shortcomings distract from the bigger picture. Some people chuckled unsure. I stayed still. His eyes found me. And sometimes he continued, voice hardening. You have to call things out when someone refuses to grow up. A few heads turned toward me now. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I knew in that moment that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a slip. This was deliberate. And as he took a step in my direction, I understood something else too. He wasn't done. My father didn't lower his voice when he reached me. He didn't need to. The room had already bent around him waiting. He looked down at me like I was a disappointment he'd finally decided to address out loud. Still showing up alone, he said loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. At your sister's wedding of all days. A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed. No one intervened. I felt my mother's eyes on me from across the room. She didn't move. My sister stared at the floor lips pressed together like this was none of her business. I stood up slowly, not to argue, not to defend myself, just to stand. I'm here to celebrate, I said evenly. This isn't the time. That should have been the end of it. It never was with him. He leaned closer, breath sharp with alcohol and anger. The time he scoffed. You've wasted enough time. No partner, no family of your own, just excuses and that job you hide behind. More laughter, louder this time. Nervous, but eager. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. I knew better. Any word from me would only feed him. That's when his hand hit my shoulder. It wasn't dramatic, just firm enough, just sudden enough. The world tipped. For a split second, I saw the ceiling lights blur. Then the air rushed out of my lungs as cold water swallowed me whole. My back hit stone. My dress ballooned, then clung heavy and useless against my skin. The shock stole my breath. When I surfaced, water streamed down my face hair, plastered to my cheeks. I heard gasps first, then clapping. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make it clear I was alone. I gripped the edge of the fountain and pulled myself upright. My hands were shaking, but something inside me went eerily still. The noise faded. The sting faded. Even the humiliation dulled, like someone had turned the volume down on pain. My father stood there, chest rising and falling, jaw set. For the first time, I didn't see authority. I saw loss of control. I looked at him through dripping lashes and smiled. Not big, not angry, just calm. Remember this moment, I said quietly. He blinked, confused by my tone. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The clapping died. I stepped out of the fountain water, pooling at my feet, and walked away. No rush, no tears, just wet fabric and steady steps across an expensive floor. Inside, something old had finally collapsed, and something else had taken its place. I changed in the restroom down the hall. Someone had handed me a towel without meeting my eyes. Another person whispered that they were sorry, then disappeared. The mirror showed me a version of myself I barely recognized. Wet hair slicked back, makeup streaked thin, my hands steady. I dried my face, tied my hair, and stood there until the noise in my head settled. When I checked my phone, there was a single message waiting. On the way, no punctuation, no reassurance, just fact. I walked back into the reception with a calm that surprised even me. Conversation stumbled when people noticed I wasn't hiding. I took my place near the entrance, not the family table, not the back. Somewhere neutral, somewhere visible. Time moved differently then. 5 minutes felt long, 10 felt endless. My father avoided looking at me. My mother pretended nothing had happened, laughing too loudly with people who didn't know where to put their eyes. My sister kept smoothing the front of her dress like it might wrinkle if she stopped touching it. Then the air changed. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a subtle shift, A pause in conversation, a few heads turning toward the doors. A pair of men stepped inside, scanning the room without making a scene. They didn't rush. They didn't announce themselves. They simply looked like they belonged anywhere they stood. The music softened. Someone near the bar went quiet mid-sentence. My father frowned and straightened instinctively, reaching for control. He took a step forward. "This is a private event," he said, voice sharp. "You can't just walk in here." One of the men didn't even look at him. He spoke quietly into his sleeve, then stepped aside. And then he walked in. I felt it before I saw him, that steady presence, that unmistakable sense of certainty. He wasn't dressed to impress. Dark suit, clean lines, nothing flashy. But people moved out of his way without being asked, not because he demanded it, because something about him made space. His eyes found me instantly. Relief hit my chest so hard it almost hurt. He crossed the room like it belonged to him, stopping only when he reached me. His hand found mine, warm and grounding. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "I am now." He kissed my forehead, quick and familiar, then turned to face the room with me still beside him. Not in front of me, with me. My mother stared at us like she'd missed a step in a dance. My sister's smile slipped. My father's confusion sharpened into suspicion. And who my father said slowly, "Exactly, are you?" The man beside me didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm her husband," he said. "We've been married for a few years." Silence fell hard. Someone laughed too loud, too fast. "That's not funny." My husband didn't react. He simply waited. My mother found her voice first. "Haley," she said, smiling too tightly. "Why are you doing this today?" I looked at her then, really looked. Doing what? "Creating a scene," she said. "On your sister's wedding day," my husband's hand tightened slightly around mine. He spoke before I did. "The scene already happened," he said calmly. "I just arrived after it." A man near the back pulled out his phone, scrolling furiously. His eyes widened. He whispered something to the woman beside him. She covered her mouth. My sister took a step forward. "This is ridiculous," she said. "She doesn't have a husband. She would have told us." "Would I?" I asked quietly. She froze. My father's face flushed. "You expect us to believe you married someone like him and never mentioned it?" My husband nodded once. "Yes." Why my mother asked the word slipping out before she could stop it, I answered. "Because you don't listen. You compare. You minimize. And I wanted something in my life that didn't belong to this room." The murmurs grew louder now, pieces connecting. Someone said my husband's name under their breath like they were testing it. Someone else said it louder. A third person gasped. My father went pale. "That's not possible," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. My husband met his gaze, unblinking. "It is." The authority in his tone wasn't aggressive. It was final. My father looked around, searching for backup that didn't come. His shoulders slumped just slightly. "I saw what you did," my husband continued. "I heard what you said, and I watched people applaud." The room felt smaller suddenly, hotter. "You pushed your daughter into a fountain," he said evenly. "Publicly. Intentionally." "That's between us," my father snapped. "Family business." "No," my husband said. "That ended when you made it public." A woman near the front spoke up hesitantly. "I saw it too." Another voice followed. "So did I." My mother looked around, realizing control had slipped. "Haley." "Please," she said softly. "We can talk about this later." I shook my head. Later never comes. My sister's eyes filled with something like fear. "You're enjoying this," she accused. I thought about that, about the cold water, the clapping, the way no one stepped in. "No," I said honestly. "I'm done pretending it didn't happen." My husband turned back to me, then his expression gentle. "We don't have to stay." I glanced around the room one last time, at the faces that had laughed, at the ones that looked away, at the ones who finally understood. "Okay," I said. As we walked toward the doors, my father called out, "Haley, wait." I stopped, but didn't turn. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're embarrassing us." I looked back then, calm, clear. "You already did that," I said. "I'm just not carrying it anymore." We walked out together. The doors closed behind us, sealing off the noise, the whispers, the collapse of a story my family had told for years. In the quiet outside, my husband squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said. I breathed in, deep and steady. For the first time, I believed it mattered. The fallout didn't explode. It sank. By the next morning, messages started coming in, not apologies, questions, careful ones. The kind people ask when they realize the story they've been repeating no longer holds. My father didn't call. He sent a short text asking to talk when things calmed down. That was new. Control had always come from volume with him. Silence meant he'd lost the room. My mother reached out twice, then stopped. I heard later that friends had begun to distance themselves, uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. Image once cracked doesn't mend easily. My sister avoided me. When we finally spoke weeks later, she didn't argue. She just said she needed time. I didn't offer reassurance. For once, I let her sit with discomfort. What surprised me most was how light everything felt. No rage buzzing under my skin, no urge to prove anything, just clarity. I didn't cut my family off completely. I didn't punish them. I simply changed the rules. No public performances, no comparisons, no dismissing what I do or who I am. If those boundaries were crossed, I left, quietly, immediately. Some adjusted, some didn't. And I was okay either way. At home, life returned to its steady rhythm. Coffee in the mornings, work that mattered, evenings where I wasn't bracing myself for judgment. The humiliation didn't define me anymore. It became the moment I stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. For a long time, I thought family approval was the proof that I mattered. Now I know better. Your worth doesn't come from people who only love you when you're small, quiet, or useful. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back and let the truth speak for itself. If you've ever been hurt by your own family, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.